I want to welcome you again to this YouTube program of Walking with God in the Garden. I hope that you've had a good time walking with God during this week. It's been a trying week for many people. We think of the war in Ukraine, all the suffering and distress that's going on in the lives of millions of people. And then we have it in our own country where there are uncertainties with regards to the economics, the high price of fuel, inflation. So there are many things for us to weigh and to consider. But walking with God in our garden, where we are placed, is the most rewarding and the most beneficial of all experiences. I'm Richard Halls, and I'm taking this theme from the book of Genesis, where we are told that Adam walked with God in the cool of the day. Whether we do it in the morning or whether we do it in the evening or whether we do it at night when we are trying to sleep, it's always good to walk with God in our garden. I've likened the garden illustration in the book of Genesis to where we are. We note that God placed Adam in the garden. And while we might not always feel that where we are is where God placed us, but right now, that is where we are. I'm thankful for where I am in life. I know that some people might say, you can say that because you can afford to buy gasoline. But it hasn't always been that way, and who knows what tomorrow will hold. The truth is, though, that it's wonderful to be able to enjoy life and walk with God. There are many, many wonderful opportunities. I have one, which is a literal garden, where right now it is planting, it is hoping, it is weeding. There are so many wonderful things about it. But as you journey in your walks with God, I want to today share with you a thought, and that is feeling comfortable with God, feeling that God has some purpose for us, and that purpose can be fulfilled to give us joy and satisfaction in life. Not all people have that. And sometimes what happens is that when we start out in life, we feel that everything's okay. And if you are a spiritual person, perhaps you even feel there's some destiny that God has for you. But lo and behold, along comes temptation. Some weakness that we find. Like in gardening, we make mistakes. We have failures. We don't always see what the future holds. And that can happen in our everyday walk. So many times we can begin the journey, but end in disaster. We can pride ourselves in our strength, only to find that we grow weak and we yield to the wrong things in life. The tragedy of all of this is that it can rob us of incentive. We can feel that God's not going to bless us now because we have made mistakes. We have somehow upset the journey that God has planned for us. I've known hundreds of people who have had the greatest of intention in working for God, only to find that they have done something that now makes them feel unworthy and that God cannot use them. We have a fascinating story in the Bible, and I want to share it with you today because it illustrates a point in life. It is the story of Saul, the first king of Israel. Saul was a fascinating person. He didn't want to be king. He was modest, we would say, unlike many people who strive for prominent positions in society, but not Saul. But Samuel, being an instrument of God, was told by God to pick Saul to be the king. In the process, Saul has been anointed the king of Israel. But Saul had a problem. While he was successful, he also grew insecure. And I want to read that story for you because it's an intriguing one. In some ways, it's very upsetting for me personally because of what happened to this man. And let me just read an account. And it is where there was a sacrifice to be made before the Israelites were to go into battle. And we are told, Saul remained at Gilgal. That's the 13th chapter of 1 Samuel, if you'd like to read it, where it says, and all the troops with him were quaking with fear. He waited 7 days, the time set by Samuel, but Samuel did not come to Gilgal. And Saul's men began to scatter. So he said, bring me the burnt offering and the fellowship offerings. And Saul offered up the burnt offerings. Just as he finished making the offering, Samuel arrived and Saul went out to greet him. This sacrifice was important, but the rule was that only Samuel could make it. But Saul takes it upon himself to make the sacrifice because his troops were all leaving him, and there was a battle that was to be fought. And then this is what happens. Samuel asks, what have you done? You acted foolishly, Samuel said. You have not kept the commands of the Lord your God. If you had, he would have established your kingdom over Israel for all time. But now your kingdom will not endure. The Lord has sought out a man after his own heart and appointed him leader of his people, because you have not kept the Lord's command. Isn't this terrible? I feel for Saul. He was ready to go to battle, but his troops were leaving because Samuel didn't show up to make this sacrifice. I'm not going to argue with Samuel, and I can't argue with God about whether Saul did the right thing. I do know this, though, that Samuel says to Saul, you have acted foolishly, and because you have, your kingdom will not endure. I just want to say, if I might, to all of you who have made mistakes, who have committed sins, who had great goals and ideals before you, maybe a perfect family, maybe some aspect of work in God's kingdom. But now you feel, I'm unworthy. I can't pursue it anymore. It would not be blessed. I've heard this story over and over and over again from people who wanted to do so much, but now, because of that mistake, feel they cannot. Friends, the truth is, while Saul's kingdom did not endure, he continued to act as the king, and in many ways was responsible for forging the 12 tribes of Israel into a nation, ultimately brought about by David. Saul continued to be the king. God did not forsake him. There were times in Saul's life when it was tough. But I think of another person in the New Testament, Peter, who made a boast one day when Jesus said that he was going to Jerusalem to be crucified. And Peter said, oh no, Lord, oh no. Even if you were to die, I would be right there by your side. Less than a few hours later, Jesus is being tried before Pontius Pilate. Peter is standing on the sideline, watching. And a little servant girl comes up and says, Peter, I know that you're one of his followers. And the Bible says that Peter swore that he didn't even know Jesus. Was that the end of Peter's life? Oh no. In the final days of Jesus' time on earth, he called Peter and he said, Peter, do you love me? And friends, that's the question. regardless of what we have done, do we love the Lord? Do we love him? And if we love him, as Jesus said, Peter, you say you love me. If you do, feed my sheep. Follow my way. And friends, that's our story today. God will never stop using you. It might be in your own mind that you feel you cannot continue the great work of the kingdom. Many people have surrendered their task to that feeling of shame. But we need not do that. Christ's mercy, his grace, his forgiveness is by far greater than our mistakes. And friends, we're all prone to make them. But we can pick up and continue the great work of God's kingdom. May God bless you in that today. Thank you for the privilege of being able to share with you here on YouTube and Walking with God in the Garden. Have a wonderful week and continue that walk with confidence today.